It was a bright morning when the CEO decided to visit one of his company's branches. Unlike his usual routine of arriving with assistants, drivers, and a schedule full of meetings, this time he wanted something different. He wanted to see things with his own eyes without anyone knowing who he was. He dressed simply, in a plain shirt and trousers, leaving behind his expensive suit and tie. His watch, usually a luxury brand, was swapped for a modest one. He wanted to blend in, to walk into his own company, as if he were an ordinary visitor. For years, he had built the company from the ground up, investing his time, energy, and heart. Now, he wanted to test not the numbers on paper, but the spirit of the people working under his name. The branch he chose was one of the busiest. Every day customers walked through its glass doors, greeted by the reception desk before being directed to different offices. He had received a few quiet complaints in recent months, whispers that some staff had become careless, that respect and professionalism were fading. Instead of sending reports or asking managers, he wanted to see for himself. When he entered the lobby, the air was cool, filled with the soft hum of computers and the distant ringing of phones. Employees walked briskly through the hallways, carrying folders, tapping on phones, and chatting with one another. To any stranger, it looked like a normal, professional environment. But the CEO's eyes, sharp from years of leadership, noticed small things. A few workers slouched at their desks, uninterested. Two employees whispered and laughed instead of focusing on their tasks. And at the center of it all sat the receptionist, the first face anyone would see when stepping inside. She leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone with one hand while tapping her nails impatiently on the desk with the other. When the CEO approached politely, waiting for her attention, she didn't even glance up. He cleared his throat softly, and only then did she look at him, her expression already annoyed, as if he had interrupted something important. The CEO gave her a warm smile. "Good morning," he said gently. "I was hoping to speak with someone in charge. Could you assist me?" The receptionist sighed, rolling her eyes slightly before replying. Her tone was sharp, careless, without even a hint of courtesy. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice flat. "No," the CEO answered calmly. "I wanted to come by today, unannounced. It's important. Could you please let someone know I'm here?" The receptionist scoffed, shaking her head. "Important? Everyone who walks in here says it's important. If you don't have an appointment, you're wasting time. You can't just show up like this. That's not how things work." Her words were cold, dismissive. The CEO stood quietly, still smiling faintly, but inside he felt a deep disappointment. This was his company, his people, and this was how visitors were welcomed. If he had been a potential client, an investor, or even someone in need of service, what impression would this leave? Around them, a few people in the lobby looked up. They could sense the sharpness in her voice, the impatience dripping from her tone, but no one interfered. She was, after all, the receptionist. She controlled the first point of contact, and she was making it clear she didn't care who this man was. The CEO stayed calm. He didn't argue or reveal himself. He simply nodded, slowly observing. Every detail mattered to him: her tone, her body language, the lack of professionalism. It wasn't just rudeness. It was a culture problem, a reflection of something deeper within the branch. He asked once more, softly, "Would it be possible to at least let someone know I'm here? It won't take long." The receptionist laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Again, listen, sir. You're not the first person to walk in here claiming something urgent. I'm telling you clearly, without an appointment, you won't see anyone. You'd better leave before you waste your own time." The words echoed in the lobby. "You'd better leave." For a moment, the CEO looked at her silently. His eyes were but his mind was racing. Here he was, the man who owned the company, who had given jobs to hundreds, who had worked tirelessly to create opportunities for people like her. And yet, she couldn't offer the simplest courtesy of respect to a stranger. But instead of anger, he felt something else: clarity. This was why he had come quietly, dressed simply, without his name or position announced. Because respect should not depend on titles, suits, or status. It should be given to every human being. He nodded once more, thanking her softly. Then he stepped aside, blending into the crowd of the lobby as if he were just another visitor. To the receptionist, he was nobody important, but in a few minutes she would learn the truth, and the truth would change everything. Asterisk. The CEO stood patiently at the counter, his hands resting lightly on the smooth surface. The lobby around him buzzed faintly with the usual sounds of a busy office phone's ringing, footsteps tapping against the tiled floor, the low hum of printers at work. But at the front desk, where the first impression of the company lived, there was something colder. The receptionist leaned back lazily in her chair, her eyes still fixed on the glowing screen of her phone. She tapped quickly, her fingers flying across the screen as if her personal messages mattered more than the human being standing in front of her. Every now and then, she let out a soft laugh at whatever she was reading, completely ignoring the man who had greeted her politely only moments earlier. The CEO waited. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted to see how far her attitude would go, how long she would treat him as if he were invisible. After nearly a full minute, he cleared his throat gently, not in anger, but as a reminder that he was still there. She looked up, finally, her face showing irritation as though he had disturbed something important. "Yes?" she asked sharply. Her eyebrows raised. The CEO gave her a small smile. "Good morning. I was hoping you could help me. I need to see someone in charge here. Could you point me in the right direction?" Her response came quickly, cold and clipped. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said calmly, his tone polite, his posture relaxed. "I wanted to stop by without notice." "It's important, and it won't take long." The receptionist rolled her eyes dramatically, then leaned forward on her elbows. "Important," she repeated, mocking his choice of words. "Everyone who walks in here says their business is important. But without an appointment, you're not seeing anyone. That's how it works here." The CEO's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once. "I understand. But perhaps you could let someone know I'm here, to send a quick message upstairs." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You don't understand, sir. If I bothered the managers every time someone walked in claiming something urgent, I'd be out of a job by now. This is a professional place. We don't let just anyone wander in." Her words were laced with superiority. She spoke with the tone of someone who believed she was the gatekeeper to something far greater, as if guarding the doors of a palace. But the irony was bitter. The palace she was guarding belonged to the very man she was insulting. A man nearby, sitting in the waiting area, lowered his newspaper slightly. He glanced between the receptionist and the visitor, frowning at her sharpness, but like everyone else, he said nothing. People in offices often learn to stay silent when disrespect happens. Afraid to draw attention, the CEO tried again, his voice calm, even friendly. "It doesn't have to be long, just a short word with someone in authority. I promise it won't disturb anyone's work." The receptionist smirked, leaning back in her chair again. "Sir, let me make this clear," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Without an appointment, you have zero chance of seeing anyone. Here, zero. If you don't believe me, feel free to sit in the lobby all day, but you'll just be wasting your time." Her phone buzzed again, and she picked it up without hesitation, ignoring him mid-conversation. Her thumbs tapped quickly, a grin spreading across her face. She chuckled softly, as though his presence didn't matter at all. The CEO's eyes softened. He wasn't angry. He was studying her. Every careless word, Every dismissive gesture was being etched into his memory. This was not just about one rude employee. To him, this was a symptom of something larger, an attitude problem festering in the company he had built with his own hands. The receptionist finally looked up again, sighing as if even glancing at him was exhausting. "Look, sir," she said, her tone blunt, "if you don't have business here, you should leave. You're holding up the desk. Holding up the desk." He repeated softly, as though tasting the words. "Yes," she said firmly, her chin lifting in challenge. "I don't have time to babysit walk-ins. This is a busy place. People come here for real work, not whatever you're here for. So please, if you don't have an appointment, get lost." The last two words cut through the air like a slap. A woman walking past slowed her pace, her eyes widening at the receptionist's words. A young intern sitting near the entrance lifted his head, stunned. Even in workplaces where rudeness sometimes crept in, hearing "get lost" directed at a visitor felt extreme, unprofessional, shocking. But the CEO stood silently. His face was calm, his eyes unreadable. He did not argue. He did not reveal who he was. He simply let the words hang in the air, their weight settling not just on him, but on everyone who had heard them. The receptionist smirked, believing she had won, believing she had defended the company from someone unworthy of its time. She picked up her phone again, dismissing him with a flick of her hand, her focus already gone. But what she didn't know, what no one in that lobby knew, was that the man she had just told to get lost was the one person who could decide her future, her job, and even the future of the entire branch. The CEO turned slightly, his hands clasped calmly behind his back. To anyone watching, he looked like a quiet visitor, brushed aside and humiliated. But in his heart, a decision was already forming. The receptionist's attitude had revealed more than her own arrogance. It had revealed the rot in the company's foundation. And soon, she and everyone else would discover just how costly that arrogance would be. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. The receptionist leaned back in her chair, her lips curled in annoyance, her eyes locked on the man she believed was wasting her time. The words "get lost" still hung in the air, sharp and heavy. People in the waiting area shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the old man's calm face and the receptionist's scowl. The CEO stood quietly, his hands loosely at his sides, his posture relaxed, but his presence strong. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he studied her carefully, like a teacher watching a student fail a test they didn't even know they were taking. The receptionist mistook his silence for weakness. Her tone grew sharper, her voice louder, as though she wanted everyone to hear. "Didn't you hear me the first time?" she snapped, drumming her fingers against the desk. "You don't belong here. People with real business come through these doors, not wanderers with no appointment." The CEO tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. He spoke softly, his voice even and calm. "Is this how you greet everyone who walks in?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Don't act smart with me. My job is to make sure only the right people get through. And you," she gave him a long, dismissive look from head to toe, her voice dripping with disdain, "are not the right kind of people." Her words stung more than she realized. They carried not only arrogance but prejudice, a judgment based on appearance and assumptions. A man in the corner of the lobby shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another woman, clutching her purse, glanced at the CEO with sympathy, but still, no one spoke up. The CEO didn't flinch. He let her words sink into the silence of the room before answering. "And what if I told you I do belong here? That I have more reason to be here than anyone else today?" The receptionist laughed loudly, a harsh sound that echoed against the glass walls. "You belong here." She shook her head in disbelief. "Sir, please, I've been working this desk long enough to spot who's important and who's not. And you? She leaned forward, pointing a finger toward him as though scolding a child. You are not important. The words hung like a blade in the air. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Even those who had tried to look away could no longer pretend not to see what was happening. But the CEO stayed calm. His eyes were steady, his breathing slow. He replied gently, almost like a whisper meant only for her. Importance isn't always visible. The receptionist frowned, confused for a brief moment, then waved him off. Look, sir, I don't have time for riddles. Either you leave now, or I'll call security to escort you out. She reached for the phone on her desk, her fingers hovering dramatically above the buttons, ready to make her threat real. The CEO didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he simply asked, "Is that how you solve problems hereby? Pushing people away?" The question struck something in the crowd, but the receptionist only grew angrier. Her cheeks flushed as she barked, "You're wasting my time, and you're wasting theirs too. You're embarrassing yourself. Just leave. Before you make a bigger scene." The irony was bitter. She thought he was embarrassing himself, but everyone else in the room could see the truth. Her arrogance was the real scene. The CEO let the silence stretch, his calmness almost unnerving. Then he smiled faintly, a smile not of amusement, but of quiet understanding. "Sometimes," he said softly, "a person shows their true character when they think no one is watching." The receptionist blinked, confused by his words, but before she could reply, a soft murmur rose from the back of the lobby. A middle-aged man leaned toward his coworker and whispered, "This doesn't feel right. The way she's talking to him." Another whispered back, "She's going too far. She doesn't even realize who he might be." The receptionist caught the whispers and snapped, "Mind your own business." She turned back to the CEO, her eyes blazing. "This is your last warning. Get out. Don't make me say it again." The CEO looked at her one last time, his gaze calm but firm. "Very well," he said quietly. He turned slightly, as if to leave his footsteps slow, deliberate. But as he moved, he caught the reflection of the receptionist in the polished floor. Tiles her smug smile, her satisfied expression. Believing she had one. What she didn't know was that her victory was only an illusion. In a few short minutes, the truth would shatter her confidence. The man she had mocked and dismissed was not just a visitor, not just a stranger. He was the owner, the leader, the very heartbeat of the company she worked for. And soon, everyone in that building would know it too. The receptionist leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk, believing she had successfully dismissed another unimportant visitor. Her phone buzzed again, and without hesitation she returned to scrolling, her laughter echoing faintly. In the lobby, for her, the matter was closed. But the lobby itself told another story. The quiet tension was heavy, almost alive. People in the waiting area avoided each other's eyes, yet everyone was thinking the same thing. She went too far. They had seen arrogance before, but rarely so openly displayed against a man who had spoken with nothing but courtesy. The CEO stood near the glass wall, gazing at the fountain outside. To anyone looking, he appeared calm, perhaps even defeated. His hands were folded gently behind his back, his face composed, his posture relaxed. But inside, a storm brewed. He had walked into his own company as a stranger to test something important. The values his business claimed to stand on. Respect, equality, professionalism. He had wanted to see whether those values were alive in the everyday interactions of his employees. Now, in just a few minutes, he had his answer. It was one that shook him to the core. Her words repeated in his mind. "You don't belong here. You are not important. Get lost." How many others had heard those same words from her lips? How many potential clients, partners, or future employees had been pushed away by the arrogance of one careless gatekeeper? How many opportunities had slipped through the cracks, unnoticed, because someone decided to judge others by appearance, status, or assumptions? He inhaled slowly, the weight of disappointment pressing against his chest. He was not hurt for himself. He had faced far greater challenges in life than the arrogance of one employee. What stung him deeply was what it revealed about the culture of this branch. A culture he had trusted others to nurture in his absence. A culture now exposed as broken. The CEO thought of the journey that had brought him here. Years of struggle. Long nights of planning. Endless sacrifices. He had built this company not only to create profit, but to create opportunity. To him, every employee was a representative of his dream. Every office, every branch was supposed to stand for the values he cherished. But what he had just witnessed was not respect, was rot. Behind him. Whispers floated through the lobby. A woman in a gray coat leaned toward the man beside her and whispered, "Did you hear the way she spoke? That poor gentleman didn't deserve it." The man shook his head. "I know. If that's how they treat visitors, I don't even want to imagine how they treat their own staff." The CEO's ears caught every word. His silence wasn't weakness, was calculation. He was listening, observing, piecing together the truth. He turned slightly, his eyes sweeping the lobby once more. He saw employees walking past, none of them stepping in to correct the receptionist. He noticed the nervous glances, the uncomfortable shifting of bodies. They had seen her behavior before, perhaps even endured it themselves. But no one challenged. That silence spoke volumes. It wasn't just about one receptionist. It was about a culture of fear, indifference, and arrogance that had been allowed to grow unchecked. The CEO's disappointment turned into resolve. In that quiet moment, he made a decision not out of anger, but out of clarity. This branch had failed the test. It was no longer an asset to his vision, but a liability. Poisoning the values he had fought so hard to build. His eyes softened as they fell once more on the receptionist. She was still smiling at her phone, tapping her fingers, oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed. To her, he was a nobody, a man not worth her time. To him, she was a mirror reflecting everything wrong in that space. The CEO straightened. His posture, he didn't need to reveal himself yet. He didn't need to shout or expose his identity. The moment would come soon enough, and when it did, it would shake every corner of this branch. For now, he let the silence do its work. He walked slowly across the lobby, his footsteps measured, his face unreadable. The receptionist didn't even notice, but the people waiting did. Their eyes followed him, their expressions mixed with curiosity and respect for the quiet way he carried himself. Even in humiliation, he walked with dignity. And that dignity was what made his silence more powerful than any argument could have. The old saying echoed. In his mind, respect costs nothing, but it means everything. That receptionist had chosen arrogance over kindness, and soon she and everyone else would learn how costly that mistake could be. The CEO paused near the elevator. Looking back briefly at the desk where she sat, for a fleeting second, his eyes met hers. She raised her eyebrows as if to say, "Why are you still here?" He gave no reaction, only a faint, knowing smile before turning away. In that moment, a quiet shock rippled through him. Not from her words, but from the truth they revealed. The company he had built was not what he thought it was, and the only way to save it was to take drastic action. He pressed the elevator button. As the doors slid open, his reflection stared back at him in the polished metal, a man who had been insulted, dismissed, humiliated, but also a man who held the power to change everything. When those doors closed, so too would the chapter of tolerance for arrogance in his company. And when they opened again, The receptionist and everyone else would learn the full weight of the decision he had just made. The elevator doors had barely closed behind the CEO when the receptionist let out a small sigh of relief. She leaned back in her chair, tapping at her phone again, completely unaware of what had just slipped through her fingers. To her, it was another victory, another nobody pushed out, another interruption dealt with. The lobby began to return to its usual rhythm, but the air still carried an odd tension. The people who had witnessed the exchange whispered quietly. A young intern near the corner shook his head in disbelief. "Did you see that? He was so polite. And she? She just told him to get lost." Another man frowned. Something about him felt different, though. He didn't look like someone wasting time. He carried himself like he trailed off, unable to put the feeling into words. Moments later, the sound of quick footsteps echoed from down the hallway. A senior executive, neatly dressed in a suit, hurried into the lobby. His eyes darted around until they landed on the very man the receptionist had dismissed. The executive froze, his face shifting instantly from neutral to panic. "Sir," he gasped, rushing forward. "Mr. Daniels, I had no idea you were coming today." The CEO, Mr. Daniels, turned calmly, his expression as steady as it had been. All along, he gave the executive a small nod. "I wanted to see the branch without announcements, unfiltered as it really is." The receptionist's head snapped up from her phone. Her face drained of color. The man she had told to get lost, the man she had mocked and judged, was the CEO, the very top, the owner of the company, the man whose name was on every paycheck. In the building, including hers, her mouth fell open slightly, words caught in her throat. The phone slipped from her hand and landed with a dull thud on the desk. The senior executive, oblivious to the receptionist's horror, continued nervously. "If we had known you were visiting, sir, we would have prepared that." Mr. Daniels interrupted quietly. His voice, calm but heavy, was the point. "I didn't want you to prepare. I wanted to see how things truly are when nobody's watching." The receptionist's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk. Her mind raced. What had I said to him? Did I really tell him to get lost? Did I call him unimportant? Every word she had thrown at him like a weapon now returned like a blade to her own chest. The senior executive turned toward her, frowning. "Did you at least inform someone when Mr. Daniels arrived?" The CEO's eyes met hers. His gaze wasn't angry, was worse. It was calm, disappointed, piercing. He didn't need to raise his voice to make her squirm. She swallowed hard, forcing a weak smile. I didn't know." Her voice cracked under the weight of the silence. "You thought I wasn't important?" the CEO finished for her, his voice soft but cutting. The receptionist's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth, desperate to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Excuses felt meaningless now. Everyone in the lobby was staring, some with shock, others with barely hidden satisfaction. For once, the gatekeeper of the front desk was the one being judged. The CEO stepped closer, his presence filling the space. He placed his hands lightly on the counter, leaning forward just enough so she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I asked for help. I was polite, and you told me to get lost." Her lips trembled. "Sir, I didn't know who you were." "That," he said firmly, "is exactly the problem." The words hit harder than any shout could. The receptionist felt as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. She had been exposed not just to the CEO, but to every single person in the lobby. Mr. Daniels turned back to the executive. "This is what happens when respect is tied to appearances. When people forget that professionalism is not about titles, but about humanity." The crowd in the lobby remained silent, hanging on every word. Some shifted in discomfort, realizing they, too, had stayed silent when they could have spoken up. The receptionist's eyes burned with shame. She wanted to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but her voice was gone. The humiliation was complete. The CEO straightened his expression. Calm again. "Prepare a meeting with the branch staff," he told the executive. "Immediately." "Yes, sir," the executive said quickly, his face pale. The receptionist sat frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to run, to disappear, but she couldn't move. She knew what was coming next. Our arrogance had not only cost her dignity, might cost her everything. And as Mr. Daniels walked toward the conference room, the truth settled over the entire building like a shadow. The man they had dismissed as unimportant was the one person who had the power to decide their future. For the receptionist, the revelation was like a thunderclap. Her world had collapsed in a single moment, and for the CEO, the decision he was about to make would change the fate of the entire branch forever. The conference room lights glowed softly, casting a pale reflection across the long, polished table. Chairs were filled with managers, supervisors, and staff members called in quickly after word spread that the CEO himself was in the building. The atmosphere was tense, as though everyone had been caught in a storm they hadn't expected. At the head of the table sat Mr. Daniels.com and collected. He didn't look like a man burning with rage. He didn't slam his hand on the table or shout. Instead, his silence carried a weight far heavier than anger ever could. It was the silence of someone who had already seen the truth and was preparing to act on it. The receptionist sat at the far end, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, her shoulders hunched, and her eyes darted nervously between the CEO and the others in the room. The arrogance she had worn so proudly at the front desk was gone. Now, she looked small, exposed. Stripped of her imagined power, Mr. Daniels leaned forward slightly, his voice calm yet commanding as it filled the room. "When I arrived today," he began, "I didn't come with an announcement. I didn't come with a schedule or assistance. I came simply as a visitor to see how people are treated when they walk into this company without a title or a name to protect them." He paused, letting the words sink in. The managers exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew where this was going, and what I found. He continued, his tone steady, was a lesson I wish I had not needed to learn. I was met not with professionalism, not with courtesy, but with arrogance and disrespect. I was judged by my appearance, dismissed by assumption, and told very clearly that I was not important, that I should get lost. The receptionist flinched at the words. She lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The CEO's gaze swept across the table. This is not about one employee. This is about culture. A receptionist is the first face of the company, the first voice, the first impression. If this is how visitors are greeted, what does it say about who we are? What does it say about what we stand for? The silence was heavy. Some of the managers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One man cleared his throat, as if wanting to speak, but the CEO's steady gaze silenced him before he could try. Mr. Daniels turned his eyes to the receptionist. His expression wasn't cruel, it was disappointed, almost sorrowful. "You looked at me and decided I was not worth your time. You dismissed me without even listening. Tell me, how many others have you treated the same way? How many clients, partners, or future leaders were pushed away because you believed they didn't belong here?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Her throat tightened. She wanted to defend herself, to explain, but everything she thought of sounded hollow, meaningless. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She lowered her gaze again, shame pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't lift. The CEO continued, his tone sharp now, each word deliberate. "Respect is not optional. It is not a gift we hand out only to people we think are important. It is the foundation of professionalism. And when respect is lost, trust is lost. And when trust is lost, Everything else falls apart. He leaned back slightly, his voice calm again. I built this company from nothing. Every brick, every office, every paycheck came from years of hard work and sacrifice. And I built it on one promise, that people here would be treated with dignity. Not because of their titles, not because of their wealth, but because they are human. The room was silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed distant. Every eye was on him, and every word carried the weight of truth. Mr. Daniels let his gaze sweep across the table again before settling once more on the receptionist. Your words didn't hurt me because I know who I am, but they exposed something. Much worse, what this branch has become. If this is the attitude at the front desk, then it tells me everything I need to know about what happens behind closed doors. The managers lowered their eyes. No one dared to speak. The CEO's voice hardened. This is not just a failure of one person. This is a failure of leadership in this branch. And failures have consequences. The receptionist's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers dug into her lap. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. The words she had spoken so carelessly earlier now echoed in her mind. Louder than ever, "You're not important. Get lost." The CEO rose from his chair slowly, his presence filling the room. He stood tall, his calmness sharper than anger, his authority undeniable. "This branch has forgotten its values," he said firmly. "And if it cannot represent the company I built, then it does not deserve to carry its name." Gasps rippled. Across the table, eyes widened. Shock spread like wildfire. The receptionist's heart dropped. Her hands shook. She realized, with sudden clarity, that her arrogance hadn't just humiliated her, it had doomed them all. Mr. Daniels looked around one last time. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything, and today it has. With that, he turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a silence that roared louder than any voice. The judgment had been delivered, and its impact was irreversible.